Hello everyone, peace be upon you. Before we begin, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe, and stay with me until the end of the story. Also, leave a comment telling me which city and country you're watching from. I'd love to see how far my story has reached. For those of you who have already subscribed, I sincerely wish you good health, ease in all your affairs, abundant blessings, and may all your hopes and dreams come true. Amen. Now, let's begin the story. Fort Ridgeway wakes up before the sun, the air sharp and cold against skin that already knows how to move before daylight. The barracks breathe the same way every morning, sleepy voices, clatter of boots, the metal clink of canteens. At first glance it looks like any other training base, but there's an edge to it that makes people hold themselves straighter. Avery is there in the back row, quiet in a way that doesn't demand attention but pulls it anyway. She does everything small perfectly, folds, laces, checks gear. That kind of small perfection makes the others notice whether they want to or not. Ryan is the kind of guy who laughs too loud to hide nerves, always trying to get a reaction from someone, anyone. Caleb walks like he's always being graded, jaw set, shoulders forward. Jordan jokes to keep his hands from shaking, and Lena watches, absorbing details like a camera. Sergeant Dorsey makes the base run on a schedule so tight it could cut anything soft in half. Chief McCready runs the firing line with a stare that makes you want to place every round exactly where it belongs. Commander Redding arrives rarely, but when he does the whole field straightens as if someone pulled a string through every spine. The first week is routine at a glance, but shifts happen in small ways, a look held too long during drills, a silence that stretches in the mess hall after lights out. Avery moves through the obstacle field like she knows how the course will trap you before you get there. She doesn't move fast for show, she moves with the economy of someone who's done this under pressure. Others stumble and complain, talk about aching muscles and missing home, but she's steady, breathing in a rhythm that feels practiced not inherited. People whisper, did she come from a special program? Is she ex-military? The admin files are thin where her record should be thick, and that absence becomes a shadow that follows her. Still, she keeps to herself, keeps a small notebook, and studies the same way she executes a movement, quiet, precise. The landscape of Ridgeway, the pine-lined ridges, the muddy obstacle runs, the simulated urban wreckage, becomes the stage where strangers will be shaped into a team or pushed aside. Early on, the platoon doesn't know each other yet. They are a collection of names and habits. By the time sun sets on the first week, those habits start to show their edges. Trust is a currency nobody can spend freely. Leadership is noticed long before it is accepted. And Avery's presence is a constant, like a metronome set too perfectly for anyone to ignore, and that steady beat is what cracks the calm when everything else starts to wobble. It begins with a single event that looks minor at first, a night exercise gone wrong because someone panics. The platoon is supposed to move silently through the Blackwater urban zone, but one recruit freezes, breath visible in the cold air, fingers slipping on his weapon. The simulation turns chaotic, shouts, a misread signal, the wrong corner cleared, and suddenly it's not training anymore for a few raw seconds. In that moment, Avery steps forward, not like a show of force but like someone closing a gap that should never have been there. She guides them out of the mess with quiet commands, hands that point and pull and set people back into their roles. Afterward, the rumor mill spins faster. Some call it instinct. Others, something more organized, something dangerous if misunderstood. The real problem starts the next morning when an anonymous note appears under the sergeant's office door. No signature, just one line, watch the quiet ones. Dorsey reads it once, twice, then folds it with an expression that doesn't read easy. Commander Redding is informed, but there's no alarm on his face. He asks for a list of everyone on the field and then asks about Avery by name in a way that sounds casual though it isn't. The message, whatever its intent, pulls a thread through the base. People begin to watch each other the way they used to watch the obstacle course, calculating, patient, waiting to see who slips. Avery feels it, and she tightens something inside her. She understands caution, she built a life around predicting small shifts that lead to big problems. But she also knows how rumors can corrode unit cohesion faster than any physical test. She starts to change how she moves through the day, less isolated, more visible at the edges of group tasks, answering a question, handing a piece of gear without hesitation. It's enough to settle some, to provoke others. Caleb bristles, pride stings when someone else becomes the standard. Ryan tries to laugh it off but watches the way men line up differently in the chow line. Lena studies faces, cataloging who softens and who tightens. Even Dorsey, who can sniff out slack from 100 paces, seems to be walking a narrow line between curiosity and concern. Then the test that changes everything happens during a live-fire proficiency check at Hawthorne Range. An instructor misjudges the safety zone, a round cracks where it shouldn't, near the line. Panic flashes. The moment stretches and then snaps. Avery moves, again with that same economy of motion, and takes control so cleanly that the instructors stop, almost in disbelief. She guides everyone to cover, calms a recruit whose hands are shaking, organizes the response to check gear and clear the line. Afterward, Chief McCready walks up to her, not angry, not approving, just searching for explanation. Avery answers with the same thing she said before, "I train to make sure nothing gets worse than it should." It's a simple line, but the weight of it lands differently now. McCready files a report. Dorsey writes notes. Someone on staff forwards a compact message up the chain. By the time Commander Redding steps onto the range, the base has already shifted. Eyes that once measured muscle now measure intent. Trust begins to fracture in places where it hadn't before because people fear being judged for following someone they don't understand. Rumors mutate into accusations: undercover operative, special program, planted agent. Avery knows how to handle missions, but she hasn't practiced the politics inside a training base full of people who are both needing leadership and jealous of it. Her task becomes not only to prove capability but to hold together a group suddenly unsure whether to follow or to recoil. The lines between assessment and exposure blur, and the stakes rise from passing a test to preserving a fragile unity that will be needed when push comes to shove. After the range incident, everything at Fort Ridgeway tilts toward tension. People start to pick sides without announcing it. Some quietly follow Avery's lead because it feels safer, others watch her like a question mark they don't want to answer. That split shows up in small ways at first: who gets paired with who during drills, who gets the last spot on a team during simulated extractions, but those small decisions add up fast, and by the time the week's next big test arrives, the fissures are visible. The next challenge is a multi-stage night operation that mixes navigation, hostage simulation, and a timed extraction back to Steel Creek Crossing. It's designed to push nerves, to break teams that weren't ready, and to reveal those who can hold under pressure. Dorsey lays out the rules with the kind of blunt clarity that leaves no room for excuses. Everyone knows what's on the line, and nobody wants to be the one who lets the whole platoon fail. Avery's team is mixed: Ryan still trying to be the morale guy, Caleb bristling at following anyone, Jordan holding a joke like a shield, Lena steady and precise. They move out under low clouds and cold wind, boots whispering against gravel, breath hanging like ghosts under headlamp beams. The simulation starts with a wrong turn by another group and a cascade of radio confusion. For a moment the whole training ground feels chaotic in a way that mirrors how the recruits feel inside: unsure, raw, and exposed. Avery keeps her head low and her commands simple, turning what could be panic into a series of controlled corrections. She uses gestures, eye contact, and a cadence she's proven over weeks, pulling people back into the rhythm. But the problem is deeper than tactics. Caleb's pride causes him to push a risky flank that costs time and earns a reprimand. Ryan's laugh that used to break tension now sounds like nervous energy, and when he hesitates at a crucial moment their movement jolts. Jordan's humor fails him when faced with a simulated casualty, and Lena has to steady both him and the casualty while Avery reroutes the extraction path. Each of these moments is small in isolation, but they stack into a pattern that breeds doubt. The rest of the platoon watches, cataloging weaknesses and strengths. Rumors that once only whispered about Avery now widen to include who trusts her and who resists. Command watches 2. Commander Redding and Chief McCready review after-action notes with Dorsey, parsing not only hits and misses but body language, choices under pressure, and where leadership came from. The note found under the sergeant's door reappears in their minds, not as a threat so much as a prism that throws suspicion across everything. Redding doesn't seem rattled outwardly. He picks lines in reports and asks Dorsey pointed questions about who stepped up and why. His questions feel like tests themselves. Dorsey, who admires Avery's skills even as he bristles at never quite controlling the narrative, finds himself mediating between command's need for clarity and the platoon's rising unease. Outside of formal drills, the undercurrents take social form. Small groups form around the mess tables, discussing who should get extra runs, who should be pulled into mentorship, who should be watched. Caleb's friends nudge him with knowing looks. Ryan finds himself isolated when his jokes don't land. Lena gets pulled aside by a couple of recruits asking for pointers, which she gives with a quiet authority that only deepens the questions about the team's dynamic. Avery notices these ripples but chooses not to confront them directly. Her method is practical: correct the mistake, repeat the maneuver, let results speak. That approach works in the field, but it frays at a training base where pride and jealousy are as dangerous as any obstacle. Pressure finally snaps in the middle of a high-stakes simulated ambush, where an instructor intentionally raises the difficulty to see how crews manage under surprise. Bullets, simulation rounds, kick up dirt and panic flares as a recruit freezes at the breach point. In that split second, history, instinct, and training collide. Avery moves to cover, pulls the recruit out, and executes an extraction sequence that turns confusion into a controlled retreat. The move is precise, fast, and decisive. The platoon completes the exercise, but the cost is social. Eyes widen, whispers start, and a small but vocal group openly questions why someone with Avery's background was placed among them without warning. Is this training or a setup? Are they practicing for something real, or being used as pawns? Avery feels the shift keenly. She knows that leadership isn't just about executing under fire, it's about creating trust that lasts when the drill ends. She also knows she can't force that trust. It has to be earned in a setting bigger than a single act. So she doubles down on routine, extra runs at dawn, teaching small techniques, stepping into the line when someone needs help without fanfare. She picks Ryan for one-on-one drills, pushing him until grammar of his movements changes from panic to habit. She challenges Caleb by putting him in positions where success depends on teamwork rather than solo showmanship. She tells Lena to lead a navigation segment and lets her grow. These decisions are not dramatic speeches, they're deliberate investments meant to rebuild a fragile cohesion. By the end of the phase, the platoon is still uneven, but there are cracks filling where rifts once were. Some recruits quietly start matching Avery's pace, others remain skeptical. Command notes progress but also flags the social tension as a risk. Dorsey walks the field at night and pauses near the obstacle run where boots have left fresh prints. He looks out at the platoon's tents and thinks about how toughness in training is as much about ego management as it is about muscle. Back in her bunk, Avery folds her jacket slowly, the same small perfection that started it all. She knows bigger tests are coming, ones that won't be solved by a single clean maneuver. The task isn't only to teach them how to survive, it's to bind them together so they'll want to survive for one another. The final simulation is set to push every limit: urban extraction under live fire simulation, night movement, and a timed crossing at Steel Creek that's supposed to be the last proving ground. Everyone knows this is the one that defines a class. Tension hangs like wet clothes. Dorsey briefs them bluntly, McCready times the firing lanes, and Redding watches from the command post with an unreadable face. The platoon moves out under storm clouds that came early, wind pushing like a hand against their shoulders. Avery leads without announcing leadership. Her gestures are small and the team moves like they belong to the same body. For a while it works: routes cleared, signals silent, the simulated casualty secured. Then the unexpected arrives: the route back to Steel Creek is cut off. A fallen tree, ripped free by the storm, has smashed a bridge and turned a shallow crossing into a fast, dangerous run of water. The planned evacuation window closes. Comms chatter rises with static. The simulation's smoke and noise become a real problem with rain and wind swallowing signals. Caleb is already carrying the mannequin, Ryan is out of breath, and Jordan's hands shake from cold and adrenaline. Lena calls out a navigation correction over a busted radio. Dorsey radios for an alternate extraction, but the only viable route would expose them to a simulated sniper lane manned by instructors with live simulation rounds still active. It's the test no one wanted, the moment when training stops being practice and becomes a decision about who you will let lead you when everything goes sideways. Avery freezes for half a heartbeat, the kind of pause that contains calculation and a personal cost. She has a live choice: keep the team hidden and wait for command, risking the crossing's rising current and losing time, or move now through the exposed lane, taking heavier risk but maintaining momentum and protecting the casualty. Either decision could cost more than failure on a test. She makes it. She steps out into the open lane, voice low but carrying, and calls the team to run suppression, move low, and keep the casualty centered between them. Her movement is crisp and decisive, and for the recruits it feels like a magnet pulling metal into alignment. Caleb covers the right flank despite his pride, Ryan steadies behind the stretcher as if he has no option but to hold steady, and Jordan mutes a joke and becomes anchor. Halfway through, one of the instructors simulating an opposing fire takes a line that's too close, an honest miscalculation, but close enough that a real hazard appears. A simulation round hits the dirt inches from Ryan's boot, sending mud and water up like a spray. For a second the rhythm breaks and everyone's breath catches. The noise of the storm and the shock of near impact could have unmade them. Avery reacts with the precision she's trained into muscle. She pulls Ryan down, shields him with her own body, and calls for immediate suppression from the instructors on site. She does things that leave no question about competence: triage the casualty, tie off a swelling ankle, and direct a risky single-file move across a rock outcrop to safer ground. Every command is practical, every touch purposeful. The crucial moment comes when the storm shifts the current and the stretcher tips. For an instant the mannequin, and by extension the team's success, slashes toward the water. Without hesitating, Avery releases her grip on a supporting arm and drops into the surge, anchoring herself against the pull and stabilizing the load until the others scramble their weight back into balance. In the rain and mud, under simulated fire and real danger, she exposes more than skill. She reveals an identity she'd kept quiet. After the extraction, when command radios for status and Redding's voice asks for a report, Dorsey's clipped answer includes her first name and rank, said loud enough to carry: Lieutenant Avery Holton, leading the extraction. The words land like a gavel. The field is silent in a way that isn't empty. The recruits see what discipline looks like when someone takes responsibility fully, not hiding behind procedure but standing in the open when it matters. Some faces show awe, others, confusion and a bruise of wounded pride. Commander Redding steps forward, walks through the mud to where the team gathers, and doesn't give a lecture, he acknowledges. He tells them the extraction saved the casualty from a situation that would have ended badly if they delayed. He doesn't sugarcoat the risk they took, but he does underline why leadership sometimes requires visibility. McCready files the incident as both an after-action praise and a safety note. Dorsey's respect is audible in the way he calls out small corrections that sound like approval. After the storm, in the mess tent with cups warming hands, the social arithmetic of the platoon changes direction. People who have been whispering accusations now have to reconcile the person they thought Avery was with the one who just put herself between danger and another human being. The gossip doesn't stop overnight, but it loses the sharp edge it had. That night, alone in her bunk and dripping mud into the latrine, Avery folds her gear with the same neatness she always has. She knows the reveal shifts everything, not just how others see her, but how the mission she was sent for will proceed. Leadership has been shown in the worst conditions Fort Ridgeway could produce, and the platoon has a new, harder question to answer: will they follow the standard she set when it gets truly uncomfortable? The question hung in the air like damp canvas after the storm, and the days that followed were a slow about-face rather than an instant conversion. People processed what had happened in different ways. Some replayed the crossing in their heads, isolating the exact moment they had almost failed, and promised themselves they wouldn't be that person again. Others tried to shrug it off, as if respect could be discarded like a wet jacket. For Avery, the aftermath was practical work, after-action reports, extra drills, and quiet corrections, because she understood respect built by deeds sticks longer than praise given in the mess hall. The platoon's routines shifted subtly. Morning runs were harder not because the course changed but because the standard had. Dorsey began assigning mixed teams deliberately, pairing those who had resisted Avery's methods with the ones who had followed. At first, the partnerships felt forced, awkward. Old habits don't unlearn themselves overnight. Caleb bristled when he was paired with Lena, but over a series of simulated extractions he learned to time his movement to her calls instead of overriding them. Ryan, who had used humor to mask fear, found that when Avery spent early mornings running drills with him, his breath stabilized and his hands stopped trembling. Jordan stopped using jokes as armor and started using them to steady his teammates when tension spiked during night navigations. Command kept a close eye. Redding debriefed the incident thoroughly but balanced critique with recognition. He didn't make Avery a figure everyone had to kneel before, instead he made her a point of reference and asked the platoon to measure themselves against that reference. McCready tightened safety protocols where needed, filing the incident as one to learn from and to prevent. Dorsey, who had been skeptical and protective in equal measure, began to use Avery's techniques as examples during instruction, pointing to specific moves and breathing patterns he wanted replicated. When he did that, the impression that Avery had been a disruptive variable began to fade. She became a resource. Trust grew in small increments. A recruit who had once refused to hand off a weapon mid-drill now did so without hesitation because he had seen her do it in the rain. Another who had once ducked away during a suppression exercise now stepped into the lane to offer covering fire because someone on his left had saved him before. The platoon's successes were not dramatic headlines but a series of corrected small failures. Those quiet fixes mattered more than any single brilliant act. Avery understood that better than anyone, leadership for her had always been iterative: teach, correct, repeat, until the lesson became reflex. Outside the training ground, the social dynamics eased but did not disappear. The whispers about classified records and planted agents dwindled as practical work stole the oxygen from rumor. People still wondered privately, of course. Curiosity doesn't die easily, but the energy shifted from suspicion to improvement. A few recruits sought Ava, what they called her now, asking for pointers on marksmanship, on breathing, on how to steady hands under pressure. She answered with the same economy that had defined her since arrival: small corrections, no lectures, repeated practice. Lena took on a formal mentorship role for navigation, and watching her coach others closed the loop on the leadership Avery had quietly fostered. There were setbacks. Pride can make people try to prove themselves at the wrong time, and a midweek simulation saw a rushed decision by one team nearly undo weeks of progress. They recovered, but the incident served as a reminder that progress wasn't linear. Dorsey used it to reinforce patience, and Avery used it to show how to break down a mistake into teachable steps. The platoon learned not only to execute but to analyze their failures without letting blame fracture cohesion. That meta-skill, reflecting on action and adjusting behavior, proved as valuable as any weapons drill. As the training window closed, Redding called a final evaluation that blended every element they'd been drilled on: endurance, marksmanship, team movement, leadership under pressure. This time, the platoon approached it with a different attitude. The focus wasn't on exposure or proving identity, it was on performing together. During the evaluation, Avery stepped back in small ways, letting others call signals she would once have made. Caleb led a flank with measured restraint, Ryan called cadence during a river crossing, Jordan coordinated a short-range suppression that let Lena and another recruit extract a simulated casualty. The team moved like a machine with individual parts now learning to function as one. After the report, Redding addressed the platoon with a tone that mixed formality and something closer to gratitude. He didn't give speeches about legends or secret programs. He acknowledged growth, resilience, and the fact that leadership could come in many forms. He also noted that whatever had been their original assignment, training, assessment, or something more clandestine, had a clear outcome, a platoon better prepared than when they started. For Avery, the formal mission parameters probably changed in some internal file. For the recruits, the mission was now internalized. They knew what they could do, and crucially, that they could rely on each other. That night, under a clear Colorado sky, the platoon gathered quietly in small clusters. Conversations hummed without the edge they'd had earlier. Some recruits talked about returning home and what they'd do with the discipline they'd learned. Others spoke of staying in, wanting more. Avery sat with Lena for a while, their conversation sparse but honest, practice schedules, tweaks to drills, small jokes that were no longer shields. She watched her team, not as someone who needed to prove herself, but as someone who had helped create a functioning unit. In the weeks that followed, the mark she left at Fort Ridgeway became more than a story about an exposed SEAL. It was a set of habits, the breath before a shot, the silent signal that corrected chaos, the willingness to step forward. That legacy didn't erase questions about privacy or disclosure, but it gave the platoon something more immediate, a standard to meet and an example of what calm competence looked like under pressure. For Avery, the mission that had brought her to Fort Ridgeway was complete in its essential aim. She had shaped a group into a team that could handle discomfort because they trusted each other enough to act. Trust, it turned out, did not arrive as a single moment but as a slow accumulation of choices, small, practical decisions made over and over until they mattered. In the days after the final evaluation, the mood at Fort Ridgeway settled into something quieter, less theatrical. People still trained hard, but there was a new undercurrent. When someone faltered, another hand was there without a question. When orders came, they moved with the confidence of a unit that had practiced failing together and then correcting course. Avery watched this change the way someone observes weather, subtle shifts of pressure and wind that predict a storm or a calm. She spent less time correcting form and more time watching how people led in unexpected moments, Ryan stopping a careless joke when a recruit showed real fear, Caleb handing off a position without drama, Jordan steadying a partner mid-breach. Lena became an informal navigation coach, her calm in the dark a stabilizing force. Even Dorsey adjusted his posture around the platoon, less rigid in ways that suggested respect had replaced suspicion. Command logs showed improvement not just in scores but in error recovery. Redding's after-action notes emphasized resilience as much as marksmanship, and McCready updated training modules to include the small breathing and movement drills Avery had used in the field. There were moments that reminded everyone their work had real stakes beyond the base. A local exercise with civilian first responders put the platoon into a different kind of pressure, coordinating with people who had different priorities and communication styles. That day, the team's ability to adapt, learned in weeks of awkward pairings and hard corrections, made the difference between a messy drill and an efficient operation. The civilian leaders later told the base command they'd seen a unit that knew how to listen, adjust, and move decisively. Those words, practical and unsentimental, landed with more meaning than any public praise. For Avery, the mission's official close was a quiet administrative note in a system that dealt in briefings and clearances. What mattered to her wasn't the paperwork but the small, human proof that the work had stuck. She found herself staying a few extra minutes after runs to watch people practice the drills she'd taught. She answered questions in a way that handed responsibility back to the asker, teach, then let them find the answer through repetition. When recruits asked why she'd come undercover as a trainee, she offered a short, honest line, to see what they would become when pressure defined them. No romantic speeches, no dramatic reveals, just the practical truth that training needed to test more than muscle. The platoon began to talk openly about next steps. Some planned to stay in service, fired by the sense of competence they'd gained. Others mapped out civilian lives with new habits that would help them hold steady in stressful jobs. Conversations at the mess tables shifted from bravado to specifics, which breathing drills helped in meetings, how to apply team signaling to business projects, the small ways discipline could make ordinary life less chaotic. That transference mattered. Leadership, Avery knew, was a portable skill. There was also the quieter reckoning with identity. For those who had been skeptical, seeing a decorated operator revealed how assumptions can blind you to what's present. For those who had trusted her from the start, the reveal confirmed an intuition. For Avery, being seen changed the terms of her mission. She'd come to test and shape, but she left with a different lesson: influence grows when you accept visibility, and people choose to follow when they understand the cost you're willing to bear. On her last morning at Fort Ridgeway, the sky cleared in the way Colorado sometimes does, crisp, honest light with no pretend drama. The platoon assembled in formation, faces familiar now, habit worn into muscle. Commander Redding addressed them with the blunt respect he reserved for moments that mattered, then turned and gave Avery a nod that said more than rank, a recognition of work done without spectacle. No big speech, no medals in public, just a plain exchange between soldiers. Avery walked the perimeter one last time, boots soft on the gravel, and watched a group practice silent movement through a mock urban lane. She felt a simple satisfaction, not the swelling pride that might demand attention, but the steady contentment of completing a job well done. The base had been a test of many things, but the most important outcome was human, a platoon that could hold each other in chaos. She left Fort Ridgeway without fanfare. The recruits went back to their routines, now carrying a standard that would shape how they trained and who they became. For Avery, the work continued elsewhere, another assignment, another group to shape, but Fort Ridgeway remained a place where a single person's steady actions had created a lasting ripple. The story that would be told about her here might focus on the reveal, on the drama of exposure, but those who had been through it knew the quieter truth: leadership was less about proving yourself than about making others able to prove themselves, over and over again.